In this lesson, I'm going to explain to you how static and media files work with Django and Docker. So media and static files, what are these files? Well, these are files that are not generated by Python code. They include things such as images, CSS, JavaScript, or icons that may be needed for your project. There are two different types of these files. One is media, and these are files that are uploaded by the user at runtime. So these are not files that are included with the source code of the project. They're files that are uploaded as part of the running application. An example of this would be a user uploading a profile picture or a user uploading a recipe in the case of this course. The other type is static. And these are generally generated on build or when you first run your application. And these are files that are created with your source code. So these might include things like images or CSS for styling pages or JavaScript assets which may be used as part of the different packages that you're using in order to style the web interface. Now in this course, because we're just building a REST API, we don't create any of our own static files directly. However, we do use static files indirectly when we're using things like the Django admin or the Django REST framework browsable interface. If you notice that when you go to the Django admin or the REST framework browsable interface, you'll notice that it's actually styled nicely and there is even some images there. And this is because there are some static CSS and JavaScript files that are included by those projects or those apps which we're using inside our project. In order to use static and media files correctly with Django, you need to add some configuration to your settings.py file. The first one that you need to add is static URL. This is the base URL for all of the static files that are going to be served by your application. In our example, we're going to be using the URL /static/static. This means that from our server, anything that starts with static/static is going to be a static file. Then we have media URL. So this is the same as static file except specifically for the media files. In our case, we're going to be using the base URL /static/media. And then you have media root. This is the root directory on the server that is going to be storing these files. So whereas the URLs were the base URLs that are going to be accessed in the web browser, the media root contains the actual root on the file system that's going to be used to store these files. In our example, we're going to be using /vol/web/media. And then you have static root. Very similar to media root, static root is the location where we want to store all of the static files on our file system. Next, let's talk about how Docker volumes fits into this. So as we know previously, Docker volumes are for storing persistent data. That is data that we want to store on the file system, which is used by our application that persists between different runs or even different running instances of our application. So it's essentially just a directory on the system that is used and mapped to our application. We're going to be setting up the following volume in order to store our static files, and that is going to be /vol/web. So this is going to be where we store all of our static and media files, and we're going to store static and media inside subdirectories inside this volume. And you'll see what this means as we move through the course and we implement this functionality. Next, let's talk about the difference between running Django in development mode and running Django in the production mode. So when we use development mode, we use the Django development server. And that server is designed to make serving static files easy for us. So it's designed to just be able to serve the static files from the apps as we develop it. So the way that that looks is like this. If you make a HTTP GET to static/static/admin/style.css, then that will automatically locate the app in our system called admin. And it does it by taking a look at the URL. So here we have the static URL, static/static/admin, and that finds the admin app in our project, and it retrieves the file from the static directory of that app automatically. So this has to be an app that's enabled inside our settings.py installed apps. You might notice that I've put the admin in brackets on the file system side, and the reason why I did that is because that file isn't going to be visible in our project. It's actually only visible inside the Python package that is used for Django. So this happens automatically, and the files are located automatically by the Django development server. So there isn't much that you need to do in order to be able to serve static files with Django when you're using the development server, because it handles a lot of it for you. The media files work in a similar way, except if you use the media file path that you've configured, then it's just going to pull it from the location that you've set your media route to. So media files are a bit different in that they're generated at runtime. So these files are uploaded as you're testing your application. They're not created as part of an app or the code that you create with the project, but it essentially retrieves it in a similar way where it will look at the media route that you configured and it will retrieve the media file from that location. This is what it looks like for a deployed application. It's slightly simplified, however, there are some things that you need to set up. Typically, when you deploy a Django app, you're going to be using a proxy. And in most cases, I recommend the Nginx proxy, or it's technically a reverse proxy. And basically that is used to handle all of the static files on the system. And this can simplify things because when you set up your URLs, so your base URLs, if you prefix it by something like static, then what you can do is you could just map that static directory directly to the location on your file system that has both the media and static files. And these can be retrieved like this. So anything after static is retrieved from the base directory. And because static, if you're retrieving static files, will be static/static, it will get it from the static subdirectory. And if it's static/media, it will get it from the media directory. Here's an example. So if you do get static/media/file.jpg, it will retrieve it based on the name of everything you put after the /static in the GET request. So here it's getting media/file/jpg, and it's getting it from the media directory. And then if you were to get a static file, so you were to retrieve static/static/admin/style.css, it's going to retrieve that from the static subdirectory. So the top one, it gets the media file from the media subdirectory, and the second one gets the static file from the static subdirectory. If that doesn't make sense, then don't worry. It should make sense as we go through and we implement the code and we do some testing and get it to actually work. There's one more thing to keep in mind, and that is the collect static command. So this is a command that's provided by Django, and the idea is that it's a way that you can easily gather up all of the static files for all of the apps in your project. So you run it by typing python manage.py collect static, and what that does is it puts all of the static files for all of the different apps that you use in your project into static root. And the reason you do this is because when you're serving your application in production or you're serving it on a deployed server, you need to have all of your static files together so that they can be served by the reverse proxy that you set up, because you won't be using the Django development server in production. So that's an overview of Django static and media files. Let's move on to actually writing some code that handles these types of files for our project.